All right, good evening, everyone. We're here tonight to discuss case study number 1. Um, so does anybody want to start off first, start us off? Any thoughts about the case study? Anything you felt like James did well or didn't do well or could have changed?
Well, I'll start off. I think he did very well with getting with the reading coach and taking the necessary steps to improve the reading scores. My question is, should he have asked the faculty to correct him if I have to correct something I see, or if I have complaints about what a parent or child reveals to me? How do you want me to handle it? I don't think he should have done that. That's my opinion.
I agree. When I read that, it kind of threw me off. Because I do believe in, building efficacy and, making sure that the whole staff is, one united body. But I think once you open that door to telling the staff, how do you want me to handle things? How would you,
Right.
I think in a real scenario, I'm kind of nervous of how that would play out.
Right.
Well, I kind of settle with a different opinion than both of you all, because I think as him being a former staff member and now in a leadership position, he needs to start off having everybody on his side and everybody as a team. And because a lot of them, I'm sure, have had personal relationships with him and switching into a more of a management role, it was more of a baseline for establishing efficacy as well as like being vulnerable as well. So I don't really see anything wrong with it. I think it sets the tone in reference to them building a relationship and respecting him in more of a leadership role.
And I can definitely see that, because at first I was thinking, oh wow, that was good that he's worked there for so many years. He said he's known them for 17 years. Becoming the principal of a school, having been on staff previously, I think that's a benefit for him. So at first I was kind of torn. Well, maybe he's just using, his experience there at the school as a way to promote that, that trust and that open communication. Because at the end of the day, you want them to be on your side. But then I just feel like you can't please everybody. And what if you get to a place where, one of the staff members wants you to handle something one way and you don't handle it the way they wanted you to? Now they're going back to that initial meeting of, well, you told me that, I had a say so here. And you told me you would have, handled this the way I'm suggesting that you handle this.
Yeah, I mean, but certain things, like, we have to realize that schools are systems within systems. So there's layers of systems. So there are certain things that occur at the school that are going to be beyond his control. For it will have to be addressed via human relations, HR, et cetera, et cetera. But the small things that he's able to manage there at the school, when concerns come up with staff members, I would rather someone come to me first than to go to level 10 and make assumptions that I did something without even hearing my side of the story. So again, I think it sets the tone for him to say, like, I trust you all, but things are going to come up. How would you like for me to handle it?
Okay.
I like hearing both sides, though.
Yeah. You can see both sides. I just recently today I had a conversation with my principal, and we were discussing being principals actually at your current school, and she suggested that's not a good idea. So I came back and I read this case study again, and that particular part kind of made me think, well, yeah, that's correct, because you're trying to please people that you were, you already had relationships with, and you have to step up your game and be in a leadership role now. So, and it goes both ways, because they look at you like, well, you didn't do certain things when you were a teacher, but now you expect us to do them as a leader.
Yeah. But too, on the emotional intelligence end of leadership, there are different elements of leadership based off the situation and based off the circumstance. So there are going to be situations for which he's going to have to code switch, and he's going to have to go into a different authoritative mode. But also too, it is about building people and building efficacy. So how do we again, it's about the students and ultimately making sure that progress and achievement is being met. But another layer of that is developing teachers, developing students, developing relationships that are long-term, for which they trust him and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think back to what Toynett said, I think one of our Zoom sessions, I remember them saying that it's not likely that, a lot of districts don't like for you to be hired as a leader in the same school you've been working.
Right.
And this is probably one of the reasons why. But I do see, Tanya, how he needed to use this to the best of his advantage. And like you said, at the end of the day, it's about students. And if we can eliminate, as much issues as we can, and make this a place where we can coexist and do the job that's supposed to be done, I think that it works for him. And I can see it working, and I can see both sides. That's why I'm glad we're talking about it, because I can see both sides of the coin.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. So what about his focus on reading? Because I know that's one of our questions. That was one of the questions we needed to answer. He focused on a reading program because the reading levels and scores at the school were so low. What are our thoughts about him focusing on that?
Well, I feel the other core subjects could suffer because the focus is just on reading, and I being a math teacher, I know that a lot of students, especially in poverty, are low in math. So it should have been a equal. What do I want to say? He should have done this equally, I guess. But I know they would concentrate on ELA, but he can't forget about the other core subjects.
Yeah, more or less, that's what I said too. Not only the other core subjects, but there was note of there being some behavior issues, kids being routed to school. And if there are behavior issues to that extent and it being of a concern for the parents, I'm sure that in order for students to really learn and for instruction to be truly effective, like the behavior issues have to be addressed. And I don't really see where there was an effort to simultaneously address the behavior concerns as well as address the reading scores. So also too, I have about the other subjects, but also I see a class almost every day for which is a math class, and the class is so disruptive, administration stands outside the hallways. And I have students tell me that they're not really able to learn because the classroom is so disruptive.
Wow. And to piggyback on what Tanya just said, Tanya, you're making me think that, like, now that James has become the principal, in the beginning of the case study, we see that he was the driving force for why students were behaved. They would they would return to school, to other classes, behaving and more calm and motivated. But now that he's principal, now what happens? Like you said, who's now in that position to enforce, discipline?
Right. So I would definitely look at that as something that should have simultaneously been addressed even if they develop the PLC or positive behavior intervention support group and started talking about ways of addressing the school behavior in a way that is motivating, uplifting, but keeping students on task more, and just developing protocol even as students transition from one class to the next.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you both, but I noticed that once we started this course, I noticed other students in our course wanted to talk about behavior or add behavior, like in the APSEL, and we were told to hold off on that. And I kind of noticed that that's the norm a lot, even in my school. When you go to try to address behavioral issues, it's then pushed off to, okay, well, what are their reading scores or what are their math scores? And it's a conversation that no one really wants to have. And at the end of the day, I feel like it is a conversation, because if a child is dealing with, maybe issues at home, emotional, psychological, mental, that is going to affect how they perform in our classrooms.
Right.
And it's going to distract your students. Like you said, in that math class, it's going to distract the other students.
In some of the research articles that I've read in reference to principal efficacy and it being translated over to collective efficacy and teacher efficacy, they address the behavior components as well, because of how important it is with students being engaged and students staying on task. And if they're distracted with other elements, it takes away from the direct instruction that they could and should be getting in the classroom.
I agree. And I think principals, and I could be wrong, but I think that there's I think a lot of them don't want to suspend and write children up, because that's numbers now that's seen, against them. So now we got to find other creative ways to deal with behavioral issues.
Mm-hmm.
If we're not going to suspend students, if we're not going to write them up, then there has to be other ways that we can deal inside the building, deal with behavior. But I think that's at the forefront. We can't focus on other levels and reading levels and math levels if you have children who are repeated, offenders.
Offenders, yeah.
But I don't think addressing behavior necessarily has to come from a punitive perspective. It can come from the perspective of building resilience with the students. And oftentimes we know that students that have positive behavior with adults typically tend to act better and conform more and engage more in school than those that have maybe somewhat strained relationships, or there seems to be somewhat of kids being a bit more parentified. So how do we establish resiliency factors within the relationships that would allow students and encourage them to demonstrate better behavior in the school setting?
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good question. Because now, Tanya, I feel like you're talking about helping them build life skills. You know what I'm saying? It goes a little deeper. Like you said, it doesn't have, when you deal with behavioral issues, it doesn't have to be punitive. There has to be a way to show, teach students these skills, and teach them how to operate in school and function in school, and maybe navigate that behavioral issue to a more positive outlet.
Yeah.
But that takes time, and that takes everybody working on one accord. And like you said, Tanya, maybe having a PLC that's focused on coming up with different ways to help children with behavioral issues. Because just like in the case study, once James becomes principal, what if that next gym teacher is not, as connected to the children as he is?
Right.
So now what happens?
Right. And as he settles more into his role as the principal, he's not going to be able to be everything to everybody within the building. Mm-hmm. So it's going to come a point in time for which he is going to have to delegate in those, department chairs or teacher leaders, etc. He's going to need to have people in place that also are aware of what the school expectations, policy, and school vision is, and that is implemented even when he's addressing other administrative concerns.
I agree. I definitely agree.
Definitely. He definitely has to delegate. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then one of the questions, I think it was question number 3, where it asks like what other resources, additional resources he could put in place. I felt like he had a lot going on. Just for the reading program and his focus on the reading, I think he had a lot in place for that, especially with the coach being there. And I like the fact that the coach was holding him accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, no, I'm not going to go to these meetings alone. You're going to come with me. Or
Mm-hmm.
when I observe teachers, whether or not they're using these strategies, I need you to be in those observations with me. And I like that she held him accountable to be present. But I couldn't really think of any additional resources he might need for that, for reading. Did y'all think of anything else, or did you write stuff like other resources he could use in other areas?
I didn't see. I don't know. I just didn't see anything about maybe a reading inventory to gauge their progress.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of a little different. I do have that I would need resources in reference to professional development for staff. Not only he as the principal going to conferences, etc., but more professional development and having the literacy be a school-wide effort. So it seems like now it is just focused via the English language arts department, but it needs to be a school-wide effort. So teaching teachers how to integrate reading and focus on reading in other subject areas.
Mm-hmm.
I would need additional funding and growing my teachers to be leaders in doing more focus groups and focus teams centered around reading and reading instruction.
I agree.
Definitely.
And also, even with me being an English teacher, I don't know if you guys feel the same, but a lot of times reading is very isolated, and I don't feel like it should be. You know, they'll only send, you know, the English teachers to reading conferences, but children have to read in every subject. They have to read in math. They have to read in social studies. They got to read, you know, like Tanya said, how to read just basic instructions. When they're taking these state exams, they got to be able to read and analyze what is the instructions and directions asking me to do. And I feel like all educators should, you know, be equipped with those skills to teach their children how to read no matter what class, whether they're in a basic reading class or an ELA class. I just feel like all educators should be accountable, and having us go to conferences and professional development, well, that's definitely a start.
That's true. In my district, everybody's required to have a read to succeed certification, and that helps a lot with all the other core subjects.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what that is. Can you tell me what that is?
Well, it's integrating reading into all the core subjects.
Oh.
So all the teachers are required to have that.
See, that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Okay. Anything else?
No, I mean, the other thing that I put in, maybe it's a reach, but I said maybe I didn't really get a good understanding of what his, I guess, professional staff platform is, but maybe even hiring an assistant principal that can come on board to actually help train teachers and help to develop, grow them to where they need to be at. And even a guidance counselor, making sure that students' needs are being met possibly in other areas that are a little outside of the in-classroom teacher range.
Yeah, because we didn't hear mention of, or read mention that he had an assistant.
No, no.
He was running back and forth all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get these, these tasks done. And it's like his mission, his vision, what he, but it doesn't sound like he has help. So that's a good point, Tanya, that
Yes.
maybe he does need an assistant. I think every principal, even if your school is small, you need somebody. You need somebody to help you. You can't do it all by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if maybe that was in there, just as an added point in the case study, maybe if he did have an assistant to help him.
Yes.
Okay. Any last remarks or comments about the case study?
No.
I mean, I think it's a scale of what actually happens. Again, I guess maybe in rural areas, the principal's role is a little different, and the expectations of what the principal is directly hands-on responsible for doing may vary from system. But here in Wake County, like I've never seen a principal that going to conferences and things of that sort. And, typically the observation is by the assistant principal. So it would just be interesting to see what happens in more rural districts where maybe staffing and funding is not as plentiful.
I think that's true. It is about resources and what school districts can afford, as far as resources are concerned. So
Right.
that's a really, really good point.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And also too, I know we talked about reading, and we talked about the principal focus, and we talked about what he could be sacrificing, and we talked about math and some of the other academic areas. But one of the things we didn't touch on with reading is writing. So although we're focusing on reading, but we know that now state exams and other I guess national exams are requiring students to demonstrate what their writing skills are.
Interesting question.
Is that it?
That's no, that's very true. We focus a lot on reading, but these exams, like I teach 10th grade, I teach the EOC, class, and they have to take that test at the end of the semester, and it's heavy writing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a lot of students that, well, I believe if you're a strong reader, you're a strong writer. But if you're not a strong reader, now you have a double whammy going on. Now you can't read what's going on the test, nor can you respond to short responses, constructive responses, or analyze the text to answer the questions. So you're right, Tanya. If, we can't just deal with reading without writing, because I feel like they come hand in hand.
Yeah.
They definitely do come hand in hand. If you're going to teach reading, as strongly as James was in the case study, if you're going to focus on that, then there has to be like a paired writing program that goes along with that. Now, what are you expecting to do with all this reading? What are you expecting them to do? Just know it? Or are you asking them to now, put what they've learned down on paper? And ultimately, that's what the state is looking for. Can they do that?
Right.
So that's a really good point, Tanya. Very good point.
And that's more than reading, because they, require them to explain how they may have gotten an answer in math also. So it's
Exactly.
more than reading.
It goes cross curriculum.
Mhm.
That's very, very true. Very true. All right, I'm looking at my responses here, my questions, trying to make sure that we touched on everything. I guess like number 4, that last question was kind of tricky because it asked was by him placing so much emphasis on the reading program, was anything being sacrificed? But if you remember at the end of the case study, he just put in there, you know, I'm so happy that our scores in reading are increasing. You know, further down the line,
Yeah.
I'll focus on math and science. But it didn't sound like we said earlier, it didn't sound like that was the focus right now. Like he wasn't looking at all of the discipline as a whole right now. He was thinking about down the line. And I think it's easy to get caught up in that. Oh, well, math is doing kind of good. So, you know, they could hold off. It's not really a pressing need. Or science is doing okay. You know, they're meeting proficiency. So we'll leave them right there. But how as an administrator, how do you focus on everything without, or how do you focus on the pressing need without sacrificing the others?
Yeah.
I would have had the teams have meetings, and I would have had them look at what their scores are. And based off their scores, determine areas for improvement and devise action plans and steps in reference to addressing those areas for improvement. So I still would have had them work on their department as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking that I would do. Yes, reading is the pressing need at the moment. And yes, maybe we need to focus more on reading, but I wouldn't jeopardize the other or sacrifice, which is the terminology used there. I wouldn't sacrifice the other course, you know, subjects or disciplines just to focus on the pressing need. So I agree.
So another thing too, and sometimes I think it, you know, in case studies, there's a little innuendos and sometimes it's addressed and sometimes it's not. Mm-hmm. But also too, Clarice actually informed him of what the test preparation and testing efficacy or ethics are. And again, like I'm asking like to what extent? Because it goes back to, I just think that James is gonna have to start delegating and have to start delegating really, really soon.
Mm-hmm. I agree, because there's a lot on his plate just right there. There's a lot on his plate just right there with Clarice and the reading program. So what about everything else that's going on in the building every day?
Right. And again, we don't know what grade level this is, whether it's elementary, middle school, or high school. So that would actually be interesting to actually find out, to drill down more on what the environment is, maybe what the staffing structure is, from more of an administrative perspective, and even the teachers, the clientele or the makeup of the teachers.
I agree. And like you said, Tanya, these case studies don't give you everything. I think it's open for our interpretation. Like what kind of place ourselves in James's shoes, and what would we do if we were in his shoes, as far as an administrator?
It would have been a whole school-wide initiative. All the departments, teachers meeting together, planning during their planning periods. It would have been a school-wide initiative.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, it says we have 9 minutes remaining. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else we want to add before we close out? I think we had a really, really good scholarly discussion. about this. I think we dug deep into the question and into the case study itself. We came up with scenarios and tried to work out what those scenarios would look like for us personally, if we were actually James.
Right.
Yes, I think this was good.
I agree. I don't think I have anything else to add to the case study discussion.
Okay, perfect.
Yep, that's it.
That's it.
All right, you all take care.
All righty. Take care. Have a good weekend.
You too.
All righty.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.